Hello, dreamers, and welcome back to the show. This is the 308th episode of California Dreaming, and I'm your host, Roseanne. This is also the fourth part of a limited multi-part series on the 2020 murder of 11-year-old Gannon Stauch, which took place just as the COVID-19 pandemic was beginning to make its way around the world. The person ultimately charged and convicted of his murder was his own stepmother, Letecia Stauch. So if you have yet to listen to the first 3 parts of this series, you'll want to pause this now, catch up on those first, and then come back to this. And I have just a few notes about this podcast in case you have never listened before. This is an independent ad-free show, and there are a couple of ways that you can help keep the lights on over here. You can follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and X, recommend us to your friends, family, and internet strangers. And if you're feeling ambitious and you have a couple of dollars a month to spare, you can become a Super Fun Time Premium subscriber over on Patreon. Starting at just $1 a month, you can listen to stuff nobody else except the tens of people who somehow managed to find their way over to the dozens of episodes that are exclusive to subscribers. And most of them are just like the free show, except they're not free. But if a subscription just isn't your thing, but you still want to support, you can do so through PayPal using my email, californiapod@gmail.com. I also have Cash App, and I will eventually figure out how to get the little bits of money I have in there out of purgatory one of these days. This week, I would like to thank Kiki B in Illinois, Sunny N in North Carolina, Beth M in Australia, Christina in San Leandro, California, Stacy W in Georgia, Jennifer J in Florida, Stacia A in Seattle, Jeffrey C in El Segundo, California, Aaron D in Indiana, Julio O, Nora F in Connecticut, Christine V, and Mindy in Cedartown, California for their support of this podcast. One more thing before we get back to this tragic story, I must provide you with this warning. This episode contains details surrounding the murder of a child and may be difficult and or triggering to listen to. I will provide you with in-episode timestamps to fast forward to, if necessary. Listener discretion is strongly advised. All right, let's get started with today's episode. When we left off last time in part 3, we had finished up the timeline all the way up to when Albert Stauch's divorce from Letecia was finalized a year and a couple of months after Gannon was murdered. That divorce finalization was signed by the judge on April 30th, 2021. From there, Letecia would sit in jail in Colorado to await trial. After the timeline, we began to go over the arrest affidavit, which had been signed by a judge on February 28th, 2020, which of course outlines the case against the suspect in Gannon's murder, his stepmother, of course, Letecia. The affidavit discusses the agencies involved in the investigation and all of the evidence that had been gathered up to that point. You can tell that this document was put together pretty quickly. However, it is pretty lengthy and it is quite thorough. Letecia had fled the state of Colorado by then, but it wouldn't be very long after the affidavit was signed and a warrant was issued that they'd have her in custody. They hadn't even found Gannon's body yet at that time. That would be another 15 days following Letecia's capture. We left off where Letecia finally showed up for her in-person interview at the El Paso County Sheriff's Office 2 hours late, 2 days after she reported Gannon missing. They had been trying to pin her down, but she was being very evasive. She'd been displaying bizarre behavior, and she was also acting very shady and suspicious in the hours and days following Gannon's disappearance, which caused her to quickly make her way up to Suspect Town, population her. Right before she arrived for her interview, she had taken her also elusive Volkswagen Tiguan through the car wash just up the street from the sheriff's offices. She arrived with a freshly cleaned car, still dripping with water, as she pulled in and parked. Let's pick up the story from there. Investigators applied for and were granted a search warrant for the Volkswagen Tiguan, which was seized from Letecia at her interview and towed to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office evidence facility. On or about February 1st, 2020, the FBI evidence response team conducted a search of the Volkswagen Tiguan. In summary, the forensic portion of the search revealed possible traces of blood on the rear of the vehicle, a rear passenger seat, front passenger seat, and an area near the glove box based on luminol forensic latent blood stain reagent tests. Swabs from the trunk area were sent to the Metro Crime Lab for further analysis. These results revealed that a DNA profile could not be developed and that the swab from the trunk was negative for the presumptive presence of blood. To be clear, luminol is a chemical used to detect trace amounts of blood at crime scenes, and although I do not have a chemical or a biology background, and this is Detective Bethel's writing this in the first person, I have learned that luminol reacts with iron in the hemoglobin found in blood. When applied, luminol emits a blue glow when a reaction occurs. I am also aware that there are things other than blood that can cause a reaction, such as other chemicals, and I do not submit that just because luminol reacted with a substance, that the substance must be blood, and only that there is a strong possibility of suspected blood. The positive reaction to luminol is meant to be combined with other facts in this affidavit in support of probable cause. Several areas of the Tiguan reacted to luminol as mentioned above. Specifically, the search team found evidence of suspected blood on the rear bumper and the step plate of the rear bumper. The location of the blood is significant because this vehicle was backed into the garage at Letecia's residence on the day of Gannon's murder. The search of the residence is discussed below, but it is noted that evidence of Gannon's blood based on DNA profiling was located on the floor of the garage, consistent with where the rear end of the Tiguan would have been. A photo is included below to demonstrate the reaction of the luminol reagent to the likely presence of blood. Particularly, the position of the reaction leads investigators to believe that blood was likely in contact with the rear bumper of the Tiguan, and most reasonably while loading Gannon's remains into the trunk. Swabs from the exterior bumper have also been submitted to the Metro Crime Lab, but those results have not yet been returned. However, the Metro Crime Lab did return a result from the trunk of the Tiguan that was negative for the presumptive presence of blood. And in the affidavit, there is a photo of the luminol reaction on the rear bumper, and we do know that Letecia did clean the Tiguan prior to arriving at the sheriff's office for her interview. In fact, the car was still dripping with water from the car wash, and Letecia's phone showed that she was at a car wash right before arriving at the sheriff's office. And, like Detective Bethel stated in the affidavit, we have come to learn that luminol can react with some types of household cleaning chemicals. Just the fact that the rear bumper reacted at all is important. There may not have been a presumption of blood, but there was a presumption of some kind of tomfoolery. Within the Tiguan, a receipt from a dollar store was located. The time stamped January 27, 2020 at 5:14 p.m. and documented the purchase of trash bags, baking soda, vinegar, and other items listed below. Investigators believe that Harley purchased these items at the direction of Letecia based on the following text message from Letecia's cell phone to Harley's cell phone on January 27, 2020 at 4:52 p.m. that read, "Carpet powder, 2 things, baking soda, trash bags." Also included in this dollar store purchase was baby oil, baby lotion, cotton rounds, and bubble gum. Investigators do not believe these other items were involved in the cleaning of the murder scene and likely have no investigative value at this point. Detective Bethel wrote in the affidavit, "I know from personal experience that baking soda and vinegar are common household items that can be used to clean blood. Additionally, I conducted open source internet searches that revealed vinegar is one of the most common items used to clean blood stains, and that when baking soda is applied to blood stains prior to vinegar, it has an efficient effect in removing blood stains. While the purchase of items such as vinegar and baking soda are common and in no sense illegal on their own, the timing of the purchase of these items and Gannon's suspected murder are beyond coincidental. Also located was a parking receipt for the Colorado Springs Airport that documented the Tiguan was brought into the airport short-term parking lot at or about 8:30 a.m. and left the lot at or about 7:02 p.m. on January 28, 2020. And Dreamers, that would be the Tuesday, the day after the murder. On January 29, 2020, which is Wednesday, the following day, Letecia returned the rented Kia at approximately 9 a.m. She was picked up by someone driving a white Jetta. Investigators were unable to confirm that Harley was driving the Jetta, but it is her primary vehicle, and her historical cell site location from her cell phone records support her being in that area. As such, I believe Harley was likely driving the Jetta. Investigators were able to download telematics and stored electronic data from the Tiguan. A more in-depth exploitation of the Tiguan's electronic systems, more specifically its historical locations, were developed and will be discussed below in more detail. Investigators were able to determine some of the locations of the Tiguan on the evening of January 28, 2020, including its location in the area of Highway 105 and South Perry Park Road in Douglas County. Investigators also served a search warrant to AT&T related to an International Mobile Subscriber Identity, or IMSI, designated to the Tiguan's CarNet feature. AT&T responded to this search warrant and provided Network Event Location System, or NBLOS, Neblos, data that would give an estimated location of the Tiguan. The data revealed that during the evening of January 28, 2020, between 8:30 p.m. and 10:20 p.m., the Tiguan was generally in the greater northwest portion of Colorado Springs and likely also in an area north of the Air Force Academy and southern Douglas County. I submit that during this time period, investigators believe that Letecia disposed of Gannon's remains. And that's an important location, and you're going to hear it referenced throughout the remainder of this affidavit. It's the area of Highway 105 and South Perry Park Road, Douglas County, Colorado. Of note, during the time period of approximately 8:30 and 10:20 p.m. on January 28, 2020, Harley's cell phone is connected to a tower that would service the Stauch residence over approximately 30 miles from Letecia's suspected location. There was activity on Harley's cell phone during that time, and investigators do not believe that Harley was with Letecia when she disposed of the body. However, at approximately 10:26 p.m., Harley's cell phone leaves the Stauch residence and goes to the area of Powers and Carefree, where investigators suspect she picked up Letecia. This next portion of this affidavit relates to Letecia, the sexual assault that she alleged happened, Letecia's visit to the hospital, and Gannon's bedroom. This information was developed following Letecia's January 29, 2020 interview with detectives at the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. As mentioned, Letecia voluntarily came to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office for an interview with investigators, but only after she was evasive and avoided speaking with investigators one-on-one. Her interview was audio and video recorded, and the below information includes her own statements, as well as an investigation geared towards corroborating these statements. In general, her statements are reasonably categorized as untruthful, incomplete, and misleading. Letecia was supposed to arrive at 10 a.m. on January 29, 2020, but did not arrive until noon. Although she spoke with investigators on the phone several times, she did not want investigators coming to her home, and it was difficult at best to track her down. Investigators provided food and water to Letecia during the interview. Actually, when I do play these audio interrogations for you, if you do listen to them, you'll hear them also offer her a Coke, a tamale, and a Hot Pocket. And if I'm remembering correctly, she accepted the Coke and the Hot Pocket. And she clung to the Coke can a lot. She did not want them throwing it away. She knew that they were after her DNA. Of interest, Letecia brought several pieces of notebook paper with her that contained notes that she had written down. During the interview, she referred to these pieces of paper and asked investigators if she could just read her notes. Investigators were not able to seize these documents. I have conducted hundreds of interviews, I being Detective Bethel, interviews of subjects, victims, and witnesses. It is extremely rare for an individual to bring notes to an interview, and it is very unusual. I have not seen this happen before, but it can be implied that Letecia has made up a story and needed the notes to refer to just to make sure she covers her bases. And you know, dreamers, Letecia had a vast array of stories to tell, and none of them were anywhere near the truth. She involved an assortment of characters, suspects, and events that simply never happened. Last night, as I wrote this, I was falling asleep listening to some of the phone calls between Letecia and Albert, and she even says on one of the calls with him that she had her notes, and you can hear her rustling around some papers in the background. And like I mentioned before, in the video and audio taped interview, Letecia takes her notes out, she unfolds them, and eventually she will set them down on the couch next to her, and she really won't ever refer to them again. The woman really doesn't need notes to spin a tale. She just thought she did. But make no mistake, Letecia can spew bullshit like nobody's business, and she certainly delivered, with or without her notes. So next up, the affidavit gets into story number 1. Letecia drastically departed from her initial statements given to the El Paso County Sheriff's deputies regarding the report of Gannon's disappearance. In summary, Letecia said that she had been held at gunpoint and raped by a Hispanic male she knew as Eduardo, with a G, Eguardo, and that Gannon was abducted by that male after he finished raping her. The interviewing detectives believed Letecia's statements were false based on prior experience investigating sexual assault cases. The drastic departure was from her initial call to 911 to report Gannon had gone to a friend's house but failed to return home, which ended up causing law enforcement to classify Gannon as a runaway, and it seemed, to me anyway, dreamers, to adversely affect how the case was handled from the beginning. Only a cursory search of the family home was conducted, like calling out Gannon's name, looking in usual hiding places, things of that nature. And let's not forget that it did take them 3 to 4 hours to even show up at the house to take Letecia's report. And during that time, she managed to keep investigators from discovering the grisly crime scene that Gannon's bedroom had become until days later, once it became clear that something wasn't right with Letecia and her ever-changing stories. Gannon failing to return home from visiting his friend was story number 1. Story number 2, the affidavit, and we'll go on to stories, I believe, 3 and at least 4 the affidavit covers. There's in total, I think, about 5 or 6 different versions of her story. I believe this affidavit goes into at least 4 of them, but next it talks about story number 2. Letecia's second story, which is what she provided to her interviewers when she did finally show up at the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. She said that she arrived home around 2:30 p.m. on January 27th. That was that Monday, that the last day that Gannon was known to be alive. He had sustained some kind of serious injuries or burns or something, but he was alive until Letecia ended him. She disarmed her security system and went into the basement. She said that Eduardo was in the basement, attacked her, and pointed a gun at her. She said that after Eduardo held her at gunpoint, he allowed her to go upstairs to greet her stepdaughter, Letecia Stauch. Her date of birth is January 22nd, 2012. So she literally just turned 8 years old, 5 days before Gannon was murdered. Lena had just arrived home from school. Letecia said she sent her outside to ride her bike, then returned to the basement where Eduardo vaginally penetrated her against her will sometime between 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. that afternoon. During this period, she believed that she hit her head and may have blacked out. Investigators noted no injuries on Letecia's head during their contact with her. Letecia also said during the attack that Gannon jumped on Eduardo's back and that Eduardo was able to throw Gannon off his back and across the room. After Eduardo had finished, he had the gun held to Gannon and demanded a suitcase. Letecia provided him with a brown suitcase and a cardboard box. Eduardo attempted to sexually assault her again, but she hit her head and blacked out again. Letecia stated that she tried to fight Eduardo off but was unsuccessful. I know from training and experience that if an individual holds another person at gunpoint, he or she would likely not allow the person to have an opportunity to escape, as Letecia described being allowed to greet her stepdaughter upstairs before returning to the basement. Most crucially, if Letecia's story was accurate, any reasonable person would have immediately called 911 and reported the home invasion, rape, and kidnapping of their child. Letecia called law enforcement hours later and did not report the alleged rape until approximately 2 days later. Of even more significance, Letecia said she cleaned up the area where this alleged attack happened. She straightened up signs of disturbances in Gannon's room and cleaned up the utility room. Investigators recovered cleaning supplies such as carpet brushes, which contained suspected carpet fibers. I submit that Letecia did in fact clean something up, but it was the murder scene of Gannon, not a sexual assault. So that kind of puts a timeline of Gannon's actual death into a little bit more narrow of a time period. I personally, I being me talking, have struggled to know exactly when it was Letecia actually killed Gannon. We know he got into Albert's Nissan Frontier because of the neighbor's exterior security cameras captured that, but we weren't as certain as to whether or not he came home alive. I tend to think that he did come home, but was in a pretty bad way. He had sustained some kind of injury the evening before, or he was really out of it. And what happened to him was likely caused by some kind of act of child abuse on Letecia's part, and it was too severe to ever come back from. I think Letecia knew that if Albert didn't file a police report against his own wife for injuring his son, his ex-wife, Gannon's mother, certainly could. And Gannon was very much at an age where he could divulge exactly what Letecia did to him. He was 11. He could talk. That was probably the reason why Letecia made that video, forcing Gannon to say that he didn't burn the carpet and or himself on purpose, and that he was going to have to come up with a way to pay for the damages. Then Letecia just ended up working this fictional Eduardo into her narrative to line up with the burned carpet story. I don't know for sure, but I think the burned carpet was a means of covering up other evidence of her abuse of Gannon. It could have been something she wanted to add to her narrative, but she realized that she wouldn't be able to control or manipulate what Gannon would tell his parents. So, in her mind, in order to save her own ass, Gannon had to die. However, the fact that Letecia returned from her 4-hour-long double trip to Petco around 2:30, based on the neighbor's surveillance, she and Gannon went inside where she proceeded to murder him. I don't think we're going to get to Gannon's actual wounds and condition of his remains in this affidavit since he had not been recovered yet, but I will go over his injuries in more details a little later on. But we do know that she stabbed him 18 times. He had a severe blunt force injury to the back of his head, causing a deep gash and fractured his skull, and she shot him through the jaw with the bullet severing his spinal cord. Gannon also had sharp force injuries to his hands, meaning he tried to defend himself. He tried to fight his stepmother off. Like I said, I'll go over it in more detail later on. So, Letecia did all that to Gannon in his bedroom after they returned from Petco. I still don't know what the trips to Petco were about. Maybe Letecia was thinking about what to do, how to do it, how to get away with it. Maybe even looking for a place to dump him. Maybe it was meant to be her alibi. She also had collected the dogs, the 2 bulldog puppies that they had, so perhaps she did need to get some supplies for them. I really have no idea, but most likely Letecia spent this time thinking and stalling and just generally trying to buy herself more time. And once Gannon was dead, Letecia stuffed him into the suitcase and then put him into the Tiguan? Maybe. Then she spent whatever time she had left cleaning up the crime scene and prepared to put on her song and dance for law enforcement with her story about Gannon leaving to go see a friend and failing to return home at the time that he was supposed to. And from there, Letecia just had to wait. Since the call was not considered an emergency, she made the report that evening, and it would be during this time, most likely after the police left, that she took the Tiguan with Gannon in it and disposed of his remains at the initial site. However, I do believe that the police theory is that she did it the following night. The next morning, she got the rented Kia Rio. She had to deal with Albert, and of course, both sides of their families were getting ready to travel into Colorado Springs to support Albert and Letecia in their search for Gannon. Letecia would eventually get her hands on that Nissan Altima that her sister and her mother, I believe, rented. And then she'll have 2 different moving vans. And I don't think she used the rented Nissan to pick him up. She might have. I don't remember reading anything about there being any forensic evidence found inside that Nissan. She could have used the Tiguan once again since she had already used it once. So it was already stained and messed up. But it is possible that she did go back with the Nissan and pick him up. The car was tracked there at the time that she was driving it. Police had gotten a warrant and put a GPS tracking device on that Nissan Altima. And she did return to that intersection of that highway and that South Perry Road that I told you about earlier. The Altima did go there. If she didn't pick up Gannon's body with that vehicle at that time, it is believed that she went there to remind herself where she left Gannon so she could go back and pick him up because she sensed that they were getting close to discovering that area because she knew that her Tiguan had the GPS in it. Whatever she did, ultimately Letecia picked Gannon's remains back up, placed him into the second rented moving van, and drove over the course of the next couple days to Florida, dumping him off that bridge. And he was found on March 17th by bridge inspectors. So getting back to the affidavit, it says, investigators took steps to corroborate Letecia's statements before dismissing them as false and misleading. For example, investigators reviewed video footage from a neighborhood security camera that captured the exterior of the Stauch residence from the day of Gannon's murder and did not observe a Hispanic male entering the house. Investigators did observe Lena arriving home on the school bus at or about 1:51 p.m. They observed her enter the residence and observed her riding a bike at or about 3:30 p.m. Furthermore, Letecia was offered the opportunity to have a sexual assault nurse examiner, or SANE, conduct a forensic examination at a local hospital. Ultimately, Letecia did not want to have the exam completed. When given the opportunity to provide investigators with evidence that would possibly identify Eduardo, Letecia refused to cooperate. Letecia stated that she met Eduardo on January 26, 2020, the day prior to Gannon's murder. She generally described a Hispanic male with brown hair and brown eyes, but could not provide any specific identifying information. In summary, she told investigators that Gannon had knocked over a candle on Sunday, causing the carpet to burn. After that incident, she drove around the neighborhood where residential construction was taking place. She met Eduardo, who was working on a house, and asked if he could repair the carpet in her home. Eduardo agreed, and Letecia provided him with the garage door code, and they agreed he would repair the carpet while she was shopping the next day. To the extent Letecia spoke about Lena, investigators were able to corroborate those statements, but never observed Eduardo or anyone else arriving or leaving the residence during that time period based on the exterior neighborhood video footage of the front of the Stauch residence. Specifically, exterior video footage revealed that Lena was riding her bike outside between approximately 3:30 and 3:42 p.m. Furthermore, the front door of the residence opened and closed at 3:28 p.m. based on data from ADT security systems discussed more below. Again, speaking in the first person, Detective Bethel said, "I know from training and experience that when individuals concoct lies, most reasonably to conceal the truth, they oftentimes leave portions of truth within those lies. I submit the statements Letecia made referencing Lena and the time period Lena was at the residence are likely true based on video evidence. Her other statements, however, are blatant lies designed to mislead investigators." Investigators also reviewed Letecia's phone records during the time period of the alleged rape of 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. on January 27, 2020. During this time period, Letecia had phone activity to include an outgoing phone call and numerous iMessages to Albert Stauch and Harley, namely to discuss purchasing a new set of headphones for Albert. These text messages occurred at the following times: 3:41, 3:42, 3:43, 3:44, 4:11, 4:19, and 4:20. Investigators were also granted a search warrant by this court that was served to ADT Home Security, which requested data stored on the ADT servers related to the Stauch residence. The Stauch residence was equipped with basement and living room motion detectors and contact detectors on the front and rear door. ADT was in possession of logs that documented time, date, and type of event that generated a log. For example, when either motion detector was activated or the front or rear door opened or closed, there is a record of that event. Letecia claimed that she was raped in the basement between 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. During that time, the back door of the residence, located on the main level, was opened and closed 10 times. If indeed Letecia was being raped in the basement, it would be impossible for her to open the upstairs back door of the residence at the same time. I submit that Letecia's claims of being raped in the basement are false, based on her cell phone activity and the stored ADT data. The logs from ADT indicate significant activity in the basement of the residence where evidence suggests Gannon was murdered. For example, between January 23, 2020 and January 26, 2020, and the hours of 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., the average number of basement motion events was 3.5. On January 27, 2020, the average number of basement motion events was 10.3. A possible scenario for the increased activity is that Letecia was going up and down the stairs in order to get cleaning supplies and to clean up the murder scene. Towards the end of her interview with El Paso County Sheriff's detectives, Letecia said she wanted to leave. Investigators seized her phone and detained her while they applied for a search warrant and obtained DNA collection. Letecia began stuffing tissues into her pants, and she said she was having chest pains and shortness of breath. Investigators immediately requested medical assistance, and paramedics from the Colorado Springs Fire Department arrived. Letecia had appropriate responses to the paramedics' questions. I am aware that Letecia has made statements regarding Gannon's disappearance to individuals other than law enforcement, including but not limited to her friend, her husband, and the media. Indeed, some of those conversations have been captured and memorialized in recorded phone conversations and email messages. Letecia's stories have continued to evolve and material facts continue to change, including but not limited to the identity of her attacker, the location of Gannon's abduction, and the details of the alleged rape. During her statements, Letecia denied killing Gannon and provided explanations as to why there was blood in her Tiguan, blood in Gannon's room, and why she was in the area of Palmer Lake, Colorado. So next, the affidavit goes into Letecia being taken to a local hospital after she tried to leave the interview a few times and the investigators were stalling her. She began to complain of chest pains and shortness of breath. Letecia was transported to the hospital via ambulance from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office for further medical attention. Letecia was accompanied by detectives during the ride to the hospital. Unlike questions at the El Paso County Sheriff's Office by paramedics, during the ambulance ride, Letecia was unresponsive to questions by medical personnel and then seemed to have a miraculous recovery when they arrived at the hospital. The ambulance ride was audio recorded. Letecia received medical care at the hospital, and the details of that care is not included in this affidavit for medical reasons. Letecia did not have any life-threatening issues and signed herself out prior to all her exams being completed. Letecia's continued evasive behavior at the hospital, but particularly after investigators told her that they were going to detain her pending the issuance of a search warrant to collect her DNA. Ultimately, the search warrant for the collection of non-testimonial evidence was signed and executed. A second warrant for the compelled SANE exam was initially authorized by this court, but then was quashed by the court. To be clear, Letecia did not allow a SANE exam to be completed. Letecia was not in custody after the warrant was executed at the hospital and left the hospital without telling investigators. She also made a phone call from the waiting room at the hospital. There was physical surveillance being conducted by law enforcement in the area, and investigators learned Letecia was picked up by an unknown person at the hospital and was reunited with her daughter several miles from the hospital. Although her behavior was not illegal, I submit that as pressure continued to increase from investigators, Letecia became more and more desperate to leave the hospital, likely because she feared being caught in her lies. Furthermore, Letecia did not want to pursue collecting evidence that might assist law enforcement in identifying and finding her supposed rapist. Next, the affidavit discusses the searches of the Stauch home and the discoveries made in Gannon's bedroom. Investigators searched the Stauch residence several times over several weeks after applying for and being granted search warrants from this court. The purpose of these searches was to collect evidence, including biological evidence in support of the captioned investigation. The forensic searches were conducted by the Colorado Springs Metro Crime Lab. To avoid confusion, the January 28, 2020 initial search was authorized by Albert Stauch, and he provided consent to search the residence. Not all of the evidence recovered is included below. However, the forensic testing results of several items, including a pair of size 8.5 Nike shoes, are discussed below. Those 8.5 size Nike shoes are belonging to Letecia. She was wearing them that day. You can kind of see them in the initial interrogation video or interview video. Gannon's remaining family members were living in the residence during the period of these searches, and investigators did not initially seal off the residence. Crime scene analysts from the Colorado Springs Metro Crime Lab responded to the residence and found traces of blood throughout the residence based on Blue Star forensic latent bloodstain reagent tests. There was visible blood in Gannon's room, in the garage, and other portions of the house. Blue Star forensic stain has similar limitations to luminol, which has been discussed and described above. By way of background, the residence located at 6627 Mandan Drive, Colorado Springs, Colorado, is a ranch-style single-family home, approximately 2,500 square feet, with a 2-car attached garage. There are 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms in the residence. 2 of those bedrooms are in the basement, including Gannon's. Next to Gannon's room, there is an unfinished utility room, and on the other side of the basement, another bedroom and a bathroom. There is a staircase with a small landing that allows access from the main level to the basement, and the garage is accessible from inside the residence. I being me, dreamers, looked up the house on Zillow. It is currently on the market for $449,000. The Blue Star reagent was applied to Gannon's bedroom, the hallway leading to the utility room from his bedroom, the utility room itself, the staircase and the landing leading upstairs from the utility room, the pathway to the garage from the stairs, and the garage area itself. In all of these areas, investigators found positive results for the likely presence of blood. Specifically in Gannon's bedroom, in a corner of the room, investigators located an area where suspected blood had seeped through the carpet, through the pad, and stained the concrete. Furthermore, there was also blood stain and projected blood spatter located on the walls in this area. Indeed, over 50 droplets of suspected blood were found on the walls near Gannon's bed. Crime scene investigators also suspected someone attempted to clean the wall based on the way the Blue Star reagent reacted on the wall. Gannon's mattress was also seized and contains a red stain consistent with blood in the same area as a stain on the carpet and the blood cast off on the walls. The stains on the mattress were swabbed but were not tested with Blue Star reagent. The lab results have not yet been returned, but because other blood in the area was determined to be Gannon's blood, investigators suspect the blood on the mattress is also Gannon's blood. I being Bethel, have included some crime scene photos that include the wall next to Gannon's bed and the carpet pad that was removed by investigators to expose the concrete below. Based on the orientation of Gannon's bed, the vast majority of the blood would be in line with the position of his head and torso and consistent with the stain on the mattress. I submit that the blood located in Gannon's room appears to have been cleaned up based on residual blood residue on the baseboards, an electrical outlet cover, and the blood that soaked through the carpet. DNA lab tests confirmed it was indeed Gannon's blood, and Gannon's body has not been found, reasonably indicating that this was likely the scene of Gannon's murder. Trace evidence swabs of suspected blood were obtained from the electrical socket next to Gannon's bed. Those swabs revealed the blood was indeed Gannon's blood based on DNA profile testing. The electrical socket also had evidence of streak marks, which are reasonably suspected to be from Letecia's attempted cleaning. When investigators removed the outlet cover, a visible stain was present, outlining its edges. The presence of the stain tends to support that there was enough blood around the outlet cover to seep around its edges, leaving a visible outline. I have also included a photograph of the suspected blood stain in the concrete located in the corner of the bedroom where Gannon's bed was positioned. This stain is also visible in the photo depicting the suspected blood spatter on the walls. The carpet above the stain in the concrete was clean, and investigators suspected that Letecia cleaned the area based on the carpet fibers and scrub brushes, the acquisition of carpet cleaning supplies, vinegar, and baking soda. 6627 Mandan Drive was a new construction build, and the Stauch family was the only family to reside in this residence. On January 29, 2020, investigators recovered a piece of carpet from the utility room with possible blood stains. The recovery of this carpet tends to further support the positive alerts from the Blue Star reagent in the utility room. The Metro Crime Lab reported the substance tested presumptively positive for the presence of blood, but was unable to develop a DNA profile. Also on this day, investigators found in the dishwasher multiple carpet brushes with suspected carpet fibers on them, and the dishwasher appeared to have been run. Investigators believe these brushes were used to clean up the murder scene. To be clear, no formal testing was completed to confirm the fibers on the brushes were carpet. Investigators also located an empty gallon-sized container of vinegar within the residence. Mr. Stauch believed that there was approximately half of the container left before he left for Oklahoma on January 25, 2020. Additional vinegar was purchased on January 27, 2020. El Paso Sheriff's deputies that responded to the Stauch home on January 27th did not notice the bloodstains in Gannon's bedroom, and it should be noted the initial report was that Gannon had left the home and had not returned. As additional information was developed, more forensic searches of Gannon's room were conducted. which revealed the aforementioned evidence. There were small traces of blood found in the depressions of the drywall and paint texture that Letecia failed to remove when she cleaned the murder scene. Next, the affidavit goes into the crime lab reports, Letecia's phone, and her internet activity. Detective Bethel wrote, "I have received and viewed the Metro Crime Lab report completed by serologist Sherry Holmes. Although I have discussed results related to this DNA testing and other portions of this affidavit, it is the intention of this section to provide clarity and eliminate ambiguity of which samples were submitted to the laboratory and which samples were or were not attributable to Gannon Stauch's DNA. Additionally, there is an unknown contributor of the DNA profiles that was developed. As mentioned elsewhere in this affidavit, I do not have a biology background, but I am aware that a DNA profile is very accurate." Investigators submitted swabs from Gannon's toothbrush bristles, toothbrush head, and from a tooth retainer that Albert Stauch said belonged to Gannon. DNA buccal swabs were also taken from Gannon's biological father, mother, and from Letecia Stauch. From these samples, DNA profiles for these individuals were developed and used as a comparison for other testing. In summary, Gannon's DNA profile was found from blood samples taken in the garage, outside of the size 8.5 Nike shoe. It doesn't, like I said earlier, it doesn't say it right here in this line on the affidavit, but those were Letecia's shoes believed to be worn at the time Letecia murdered Gannon, leaving the bloodstain evidence behind on her shoes, and I believe she was wearing those same shoes in that videotaped interview. There were also swabs taken from DNA samples that were found to be Gannon's from his bedroom. Letecia's DNA was recovered from the interior of the size 8.5 Nike shoes. I submit to the court that the lab results tend to corroborate the theory that Gannon was indeed murdered in his bedroom, brought into the garage, and his remains loaded into the Volkswagen Tiguan, subsequently to be disposed of in an unknown location. So the affidavit goes on to list the DNA samples collected and tested. The affidavit identifies these samples and are labeled and numbered, and these samples are listed in the document, but I am not going to read those off to you. Instead, I'll tell you what the piece of evidence is, what it was compared to, where it came from, and whatever its significance is in terms of evidentiary value. A serology study was conducted by the Metro Crime Lab, and the following samples tested positive for the presence of blood. These samples were analyzed and compared to known DNA samples of Gannon, Letecia, and Albert. A sample taken from a piece of carpet found inside the carpet roll in the utility room had a mixture of 3 contributors, at least one of which was male. A DNA profile was not suitable for comparison due to the number of contributors and the complexity of the mixture. There is a list of 4 samples taken from the garage of the Stauch residence, directly under where the rear hatch of the Tiguan, when reversed into the garage, had DNA profiles found from blood that is the mixture of 2 contributors, one of which is male. The major profile matches Gannon Stauch. DNA was taken from the carpet at the base of the garage stairs, but a DNA profile could not be developed, but tested presumptively positive for the presence of blood. A sample was taken from the blood-stained carpet fibers in Gannon's bedroom. A DNA profile was obtained from that blood and matched the DNA profile of Gannon. A sample taken from the corner of Gannon's bedroom on the carpet padding by his bed was tested. A DNA profile was developed and matched the DNA profile of Gannon. A sample was taken from the electrical outlet cover and from the electrical socket in Gannon's bedroom near his bed. A DNA profile was obtained from that blood and matches the DNA profile of Gannon. A sample was taken from a blood stain on top of the foam carpet in Gannon's bedroom and from the back side of the carpet in Gannon's bedroom near his bed. The DNA profiles developed again matched that of Gannon Stauch. A sample was taken from the trunk area of the Tiguan but was found to be negative for the presumptive presence of blood. A sample taken from a teal throw pillow in the basement of the Stauch residence was found to be presumptively positive for the presence of blood, but no DNA profile was able to be developed. A sample was taken from the outsole of the right Nike shoe. A DNA profile was obtained after swabbing and confirmed the bloodstain on the outside of the right shoe was found to be a match to the DNA profile of Gannon Stauch. Furthermore, a DNA profile was obtained from a swab of the inside of the right shoe, which matched the DNA profile for Letecia Stauch. Next, the affidavit discusses historical cell sites for the phones related to this case. Investigators applied for and were granted search warrants by this court to obtain historical call detail records to include cell site locations of cellular devices known to be utilized by Letecia and Harley. The affiant has reviewed the information from this analysis and in summary learned the following information. Historical cell site analysis helps to determine the location of a cellular telephone based on cell tower antenna locations and orientation. Locations are determined by activity of the cell phone and represent an approximate area, not an exact location. Different cellular carriers report this information in different formats and fashions. This historical cell site analysis identified unusual activity for Letecia, including potentially disconnecting her cell phone from the cellular network for several hours. I submit that by disconnecting the phone, Letecia intended to prevent law enforcement from being able to determine her location. Specifically, this occurred on January 28, 2020, during the evening that she disposed of Gannon's remains. Investigators applied for and were granted a search warrant for Letecia's cellular phone. A physical download was conducted and investigators were able to recover data inclusive of text messages, call records, and specific times her cell phone was unlocked, battery levels, and other information. In summary, investigators learned that Letecia lied to her employer, her husband, her friends, her daughter, and the children's babysitter. I will not include each and every text message or lie. Yeah, we'd be here forever if she did that. Additionally, there are messages that would otherwise tend to corroborate Letecia's statements about Gannon's whereabouts on the afternoon of January 27, 2020, if in fact he did go to play with his friends. As discussed in other portions of the affidavit, Letecia's story was false and misleading, and these messages were likely sent as a part of her larger plan to support her initial lies about his disappearance. For example, on January 28, 2020, at approximately 5:14 a.m., Letecia had a conversation with Stephanie, the children's babysitter. In the affidavit, there is an image of the text message Letecia sent to the babysitter where Letecia claimed Gannon needed to go to the doctor. There is no indication that Gannon ever went to a doctor, and Letecia never brought that up with investigators. I looked at the portion of the text messages between Letecia and the babysitter that was included in this affidavit. The timestamps were converted to the coordinated universal time for the established reference points when things happen in different time zones. You've heard this referred to as UTC time. But fortunately, in the text conversation that the two ladies, it brings up the time, or they brought up the time themselves in their within their conversation. So this is Letecia texting the babysitter towards the beginning of her initial story about Gannon leaving to see a friend and then failing to come back. Letecia texted, "This happened after 3:30. Her next text message said, "We talked to him and told him to be home by 6. The babysitter replied, "Someone posted that he wasn't at school either." Letecia replied, "He had to go to the doctor for his stomach." She sent another text message right after that and said, "But he was here in the afternoon." The babysitter texted back and said, "Where did he say he was at?" Letecia replied, "Honestly, I don't keep up with his friends." Letecia made statements to investigators via text message that could be considered exculpatory in nature related to the presence of blood in the basement of their residence as seen in the below text message. I being Detective Bethel, have talked with investigators that were inside the Stauch residence on January 27, 28, and 29. There was no odor of smoke and no evidence of smoke. In fact, One detective noted that the basement smelled like coconut and was very pleasant. Furthermore, I know that burns often do not produce wounds that bleed profusely. These text messages have the coordinated universal time. However, these texts were happening leading up to the time that Letecia was supposed to show up at the sheriff's office for a formal interview, but was being evasive and stalling. I believe she was texting Detective Bethel. Bethel appeared to be the detective that Letecia trusted the most. She's the one who had to keep getting up and leaving the interview room, which really seemed to annoy Letecia. But she was leaving the room because they were all out there getting a look at this elusive Tiguan that they finally had within reach. They were just waiting for that search warrant to be granted by the judge, so they were desperate to stall too, but also needed to keep Letecia there so she would stay put. They knew if she slipped away, they would have a hard time finding her, and it would take more than a month to finally get that woman into handcuffs. So the text message Letecia sent said, "When we came back inside from the smoke, there was blood on both of us. I didn't know what to do. I was scared I would get cussed out about it, and I didn't know if he should go to the doctor. I kept trying to add the candle thing, but Albert kept saying it was small and minor. I was scared the basement was smoky, and when I threw the covers on everything, we both had blood." Letecia's next text said something that gives us some insight into her state of mind, kind of like her Google searches. She texted, "You don't understand how hard it is to be a stepmom." She sent that text message to Detective Bethel. The below message appears to contain instructions from Letecia to Harley to purchase carpet powder, baking soda, trash bags on or about January 27th, 2020 at 4:52 p.m. These text messages are important because investigators believe the purpose of these items was to clean up blood from the murder of Gannon. The text message included in the affidavit is the one Letecia sent to Harley that said carpet powder, 2 things, baking soda, trash bags. Investigators recovered limited GPS and location data from Letecia's phone. There are crucial time periods, such as the evening of January 28, 2020, that investigators were not able to recover location history because Letecia disconnected her phone from the cellular network or turned the phone off. Letecia stored several written notes within her iPhone. The majority of these notes contained what appeared to be usernames, passwords, or insurance information. There were several notes that appeared to reference her unhappiness in the relationship and shed some light on potential household instability. I was able to review some, but possibly not all, of the stored internet search history and the websites visited recovered from the forensic physical download and search of Letecia's phone. Between the dates of January 25th through January 28th, Letecia viewed websites associated with searching for a job in states other than Colorado, such as Los Angeles, California, Orlando, Florida, Pensacola Beach, Florida, and Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Letecia also viewed apartments and 2-bedroom rental properties in Florida. Additionally, she visited a moving cost calculator website. Letecia's internet activity also captured the search for a rental car and visited the website Priceline.com on January 28, 2020 at or about 8:17 a.m. I submit this timing is consistent with the acquisition of the rented Kia Rio. That's the car that she rented the morning after she reported Gannon missing in order to be able to pick up Albert from the Colorado Springs airport and not have to use her Tiguan because Gannon's body was in it. Letecia appeared to use Google, a popular online search engine. I have included some of her queries to Google along with the date and approximate time of the search. Not all of her Google searches are included below. I submit, and I, as Detective Bethel writing this, submit that Letecia's search history is important because the history suggests she might have been struggling as a step-parent and additionally suggests that she was not happily married to Mr. Stauch. While her search history alone does not provide a motive to murder Gannon, it does shed light on her inquisitive thoughts of her position in the family, memorialized in Google's search engine. I also direct the court's attention to the way Letecia's search terms are sometimes entered. Letecia hit the period key instead of the space key multiple times while searching the internet. This will be significant during the discussion of a search conducted on Gannon's phone, as discussed above, and will be further discussed below. There are other searches on Letecia's phone that use a period, and additional search history over a longer time span does exist. That is not listed below. And with that, dreamers, I'm going to end this fourth part here. I thought I was going to do this in 4 parts, but there's still more than another hour of content that I have written. I have it all ready to go, so I'm just going to keep recording for the rest of this morning and try to get both episodes out for you today, at the latest by tomorrow, which is Valentine's Day. I actually have to go back to California this weekend to pick up all of the animals because Evelyn is going on a road trip with a friend, and she's going to swing by here when the road trip is over to pick them up next week. I was just in California for other business with an estate planning attorney last week, and I didn't realize that I needed to turn back around a week later. And that's because Evelyn's vacation was actually scheduled for the end of the month, like the last weekend, if not into March, but her plans changed. So I didn't think I was going to do back-to-back weekends to California, but that's okay. It's a decent drive. Unless there's a crash, then there's problems. All right, I'll end this here, and we will pick back up with part 5 and those very interesting Google searches of Letecia's. That's all I've got for now. I'll be back very soon. This is your host, Roseanne, and as always, take care, be safe, and sweet dreams.